All right, we have Cameron Jensen with us in Studio B. We just finished a fascinating conversation about his life as a mountain man and his goals to summit
like a
Mount
mountain
Everest.
man too. You got the beard going.
You got to. It's just part. When you're on the mountain, you got to grow it out. You know, you have to. It's part of it, man. It's part of
shaving. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we love that stuff. And if you missed that part of the conversation, download the podcast. You won't be disappointed. Let's get into the football now. In terms of BYU football, and I know you're passionate, always have been, always will be, what's your number one concern with BYU football right now?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody. I always look at the quarterback position, right? I'm not as worried with Grimes. He has, 20 years of experience coaching. I'm always concerned with a first-year offensive coordinator, but not so with Grimes, and especially when you have A-Rod with him. It's the quarterback position, right? Tanner Mangum hasn't been able to do as many reps, even though he's well ahead of schedule, right? But still, just not having someone that's already determined. You have Bo Hodge, hasn't been able to stay through a season. Then you have Zach Wilson, a freshman. That concerns me, right? Is just who's going to be that guy that's going to be consistent, that's going to fit within Grimes' offense. And then when you have drastic differences with Bo Hodge and Tanner Mangum, guys, those are two different offenses in a lot of ways. And so that concerns me when you have so many unknowns at the quarterback position, especially at BYU, when that's a vital position. It is on any team, but I just wonder who's going to be that guy.
I love that you used the word consistent because John Beck was Mr. Consistency when you played at BYU.
So how does that dynamic work? Because you knew John was the quarterback. You knew he'd do his thing and kind of help lead the offense. You'd lead the defense. Does there need to be a guy or set of guys that it's clear are the leaders? Because I didn't feel like that was necessarily the case last season.
Yeah, and I talk about this with Criddle on his show all the time, is I'm surprised you think of BYU that leadership would be something that we'd see all the time, right? Missions and all that, but you have seen a void of it. And you talk about John Beck. As a player and just the consistency, especially at that position, right? Just knowing and seeing him out there working harder than anybody, getting teammates to come, calling him out. There's something when you have peer-to-peer accountability rather than a coach saying you got to do things, it's drastically different. I remember Brady Papinga. I was more afraid of him than Coach Mendenhall, and that's saying a lot.
And that's
right?
still the case.
And that's still, and I just remember at practice, if I didn't bring it or in a game or film, he saw something, he was the first guy going, Cameron, you're better than that. What are you doing? And that goes a long ways. And so you look at a team, there's really four positions that leadership, typically comes from, right? Is you have the quarterback, and then you have center, right? Empey as a freshman, that's going to be hard. Then you go to middle linebacker, Butch Powell. I want to see that this year. Last year, I know he had a disappointing season. I hope this offseason he's focused. I look at him to be the guy to step up. And then you go to safety with Zane Anderson, which I think as well. And then I throw Corbin Kafusi in there. You have to have this leadership, and it's been a void. And who are those guys? Because it brings stability and accountability. And so I really look to those guys as being the ones that, hey, lead this team and be those guys to get everybody bought in. And, man, let's go.
Follow up to that, and I asked Andrew George this the other day. Interesting response from him. I said, if Kalani, so Bronco Mendenhall was the point of leadership. Like, it started there, right? Kalani Sitake is a different kind of guy. And his strength is his personality, and it's fun, and he's a great recruiter, and guys like him. If he's not a bad cop per se, how's that going to work with the players? Like, can they govern themselves? Andrew George felt like, no, it's hard. What do you think?
No, I agree. I don't think 18, in BYU's case, 21-year-olds can really manage themselves, right? There has to be accountability. And maybe it's not the head coach, but there needs to be someone. And I remember the first practice I went to in spring ball, before I even got to practice, whose voice did I hear? Coach Grimes. Getting on the offensive lineman, right? And I've heard about just his personality, which I think goes well. There's different type of head coaches. There's the player coaches, there's those, but I think there always has to be accountability, always. In any successful team organization I've been a part of, there is accountability. And so I know that's not Kalani's style, but I still think he needs to hold people accountable. But then when you have a guy like Grimes, Elisa,
defensively, who is it is the question.
I'd say Elisa has to be that guy, is, hey, because Mendenhall did that when he wasn't the head coach. I knew, like, there was accountability. There's no doubt, right? I mean, every day there was accountability. And so Grimes and Elisa need to be those guys. And so I really look to them to instill what I think was missing in the program last year.
Cameron Jensen with us on BYU Sports Nation. I want to talk a little bit more about Jeff Grimes. And I know it's hard to quantify it, but how much of an impact can a guy like that have on the culture of BYU football?
Man, I love college football in general, and one thing I always study are coaches, right? I read their books. I love looking into the programs, and there's one thing that just amazes me, and that's the ability of one coach to have on a program, right? What they can do. And you see it all the time. A new coach comes in, turns it around in 2 years, right? And I think Grimes' impact, not just from an X's and O's standpoint, but from a leadership, from an accountability perspective, cannot be quantified, right? I think I look at this coaching staff, and I think just the offense and just the experience and what that brings equates to 2 wins last year, right? Just that component of it. So I think having him and what he brings outside of X's and O's is extremely valuable.
Yeah, let's talk about the quantifiable impact too. So in 2000, Lavelle's last year, you have kind of the same group you have in 01. You go from 6-6 to 12-2 like that. When Bronco Mendenhall came in, it was losing record to 6-6, and then the next year you're 11-2. Like that kind of jump can happen. Now, that was in the Mountain West. Here BYU is as an independent, certainly tougher schedules. BYU is kind of an 8 or 9 win team. Last year 4. How do you think BYU can rebuild its identity in football independence, which is ranked, good quarterback play, winning, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think to rebuild it, there's one thing, and you've got to win. And you've got to win in these national level. Maybe it's not every game, but you got to win. I look back those years. We beat Oklahoma. We didn't win all the games, but we beat those games. We were competitive. Some we lost. But we have to win some of those games on the national level, right? And there needs to be that consistency. I look, yeah, the schedule is a little bit more difficult, but we can get to 8, 9 wins. I look at fairly consistent. Then you look at 2020, 2021 schedule. I think with that, we have a chance to get to those 10 and 11 seasons, right? There are some difficult teams on those schedules, but there's enough light and just what I think BYU can be at that point, we can get to those 10 and 11 seasons, right? It's going to be more difficult. It might not be as consistent, but every few years we need to be at that level and win some of those games. And I think BYU can do that. Maybe not as consistent under Bronco Mendenhall with that schedule, but we can do it every other year, every 3 years. And to me, that's competing.
Linebacker great Cameron Jensen on BYU Sports Nation. Coming off of a 4-9 season, what would qualify as success for BYU football in 2018?
Man, I have a high standard, right? I just love BYU, and I think we can compete. If you ask anyone, I think they'll say bowl game, 6 wins, right? But I look at next year's schedule, 1st to 3, you're playing Wisconsin, Cal, Arizona. You win one of those, and then you have McNeese State, Hawaii, Utah State, Northern Illinois, New Mexico State. I think we can win 8 games next year. So I look at it as, no, let's just not get 6 wins. I think we can win 8 games. And obviously I look at this Utah rivalry. For me to be successful, we have to start making that competitive, right? And so that burns me, especially a guy who grew up in the state and that. So I look at 8 wins, and we have to start beating Utah, right? And so that's what I measure success. And I think we can get to 8 wins
Not
next
only
year.
that, you grew up in Bountiful, in the heart
Around
of
the corner.
Ute country. I mean, there
My dad was a Ute, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
my dad was a Ute. So, yeah, it's that rivalry's great. And just from this end, we got to make that competitive.
So big picture, we've talked about how I don't think if BYU is winning 8, they're very relevant. You can have moments of relevance. Hey, you got this big win, right? But like that whole season, because you were a part of relevancy, 11-2. BYU was relevant, top 15, awesome. I feel like BYU schedules are just a little too tough. Just a little too tough.
And look, I think.
What do you think?
I think there's a different. I do think these schedules are more difficult, right?
For
and
sure.
so our standard was every year, right? We wanted to be top 20, top 15. But then again, I think this is a little bit more difficult. So my standard is I still think once every 1, 2, 3 years, we should win 10 games. We should
BYU
get
has
up
it
a
for a
rank.
while. I think there's some angst because of that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
been 7 years since BYU was ranked at the end of a season.
Exactly. And I'm not saying every year's the standard because that's going to be difficult, but we need to do that once every 3, 4, 5 years is be ranked, have a magical season. And I think BYU can do that. Maybe it's not every year, 10, 11 wins, but we should be able to 3, 5 years do that.
All right. Cameron Jensen, bringing it. Not only on mountain climbing, but on BYU football. Let's do this again soon.
Dude, love it, man. Anytime, guys. Love it.
Let's get your signature. If we
Please
could on it.
sign
Oh, man.
our
What are we
stretch
doing?
white
The flag?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead and go sign it right now.
You got it.
Cameron Jensen putting his autograph on the Stretch Y flag in Studio B.
The only person to get to base camp at Everest, I think, on our flag. That's a new thing.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
And how many Ricks College Vikings do we have on that flag is another question. Yeah.
Let's see.
It's a dying breed, man.
Yeah,
Dying
Cameron
breed.
and Johnny Harline, right?
Johnny Harline.
Is that it?
Jason Buck, you got Buck on here, don't you?
I don't know that we have Jason on there. We need Jason on there. It's a good point. Yeah.